Welcome to Local, Global, Local, or LGL for short. This is the series where we're starting where MBS, Mathematics Behind Sanctification, left off, and we're talking about an agent, a person, and what can they do with their agency to influence their environment. So I want to talk about love today, but first I want to talk about Ruth. Ruth is a person from the Old Testament. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, came to Moab from Judah. Now, tragedy befalls this family. Naomi's husband dies, and Ruth's husband dies, and Naomi makes the decision to return to Judah. Now, she tells Ruth, stay with your people. But Ruth refuses, and she takes a leap of faith and decides to go back to Judah with Naomi and go into a place where she does not know the people, she does not know the customs, and their God is not her God. She takes a leap of faith into the unknown. And I think that is a perfect metaphor to talk about what love, what romantic commitment inherently is. Now, how to talk about love? You know, we have a whole bunch of options. There's the materialist neuroscience version, devil's advocate, biochemically no different than eating large quantities of chocolate, but that's pretty nihilistic. So, what about songs? Love songs, country music, pop music from earlier in my life, not so much pop music today. And then going back, the rock ballads, the Sinatra era style of music. But how can we describe love? So I'm going to take a different route with it today, and I want to talk about love in terms of finance. So we're going to do a brief bit of finance education, but as you'll see, this can be very illuminating for how love works and the dynamics of love. So the first one I want to start with is equity. Equity, simply put, is a direct ownership of a company by an investor. And when we think about love, two people, as a relationship grows, as attraction grows, as commitment grows, it's really like they hold bigger and bigger ownership stakes in each other, starting with something as simple as schedules, as simple as friend groups. And on the heart level, suddenly this other person has, or you have a hold of their mood, of their humor, of their emotions, and you slowly begin to acquire more of each other. Next, I want to talk about illiquidity. In finance, is the difference between a liquid asset and an illiquid asset. A liquid asset is something that can be sold tomorrow. Stocks, perfectly liquid. You want to sell them, click sell on your favorite brokerage app, and they're sold. An illiquid asset is much more difficult to get rid of. There's paperwork, a legal process, not that big of a market for it. Love is a liquid. If you've been dating somebody for a while, suddenly it's very hard to switch that attachment to somebody else. Suddenly it's very hard. You have the same schedules, the same friend group. You do the same kind of things together. You spend more and more time together. But really, as you come to love each other, you view the other person as indispensable. It'd be hard to live without them at all. And this asset, this love, becomes more and more a liquid. And then finally, volatility. Put simply, a diversified portfolio, many different asset classes, has lower liquidity, because if something crazy happens over here, you still got all this not crazy stuff keeping everything relatively stable. Now, if you put all your eggs in one basket and that basket explodes, suddenly everything's all over the place. And with love, with your partner, if they're in trouble, if they're hurting, or if they're excited, if they're elated, all of a sudden that other person's mood has such a large say over how you feel, over what you think, over ultimately what your plans are for now, for tomorrow, and maybe even for far in the future. So I want to bring us back to a character that we explored in the Amen Algorithm series, the first lecture in that series being about stacks of agency. That would be Marissa. Marissa is the brunette girl who's a senior at her university when her boyfriend proposes to her. But the story is a little bit more complicated than the movie The Little Mermaid. Marissa comes from a single parent home. She had to take a sort of direct parenting stake in her younger siblings because there was a big age gap. She's diagnosed with ADHD and it is not entirely under control. And due to her upbringing, she's always struggled with love. She can see how someone might be right for her, but she has a hard time seeing how she could be right for somebody else. Enter her boyfriend, Steve. So the proposal is on the last day of senior year. They met when they were sophomores. They met friend group to friend group. Marissa's friends became friends with Steve's friends, and they began to see each other more and more regularly. So, going through the finance analogy we have created, as these go, Marissa starts to acquire progressively higher amounts of equity with Steve. So basically, he likes her. He thinks about her. He wonders about whether, if he asked her out, she would say yes. And before he ultimately does ask her out, he gets real nervous, but manages to follow through. So they start dating. Then we have Illiquidity. They're dating. Now their friend groups are really united. Maybe they have a class in common and they begin studying together. And eventually, as their relationship goes on, he meets her parents, she meets his parents. He gets a huge kick out of her siblings like him, and this asset becomes more and more illiquid. He can't even really think about being with anybody else or starting this whole process over again because of how intertwined their lives are, yes, but more importantly, because of how much she means to him. And then ultimately, we have volatility. Steve knows how Marissa is. Throughout their 2 years of dating, there's been periods of time where she almost left. There's been periods of time where she was really anxious because of a class, or because she was studying for some kind of test, or it was just general worry about what the future holds. So he's no stranger to volatility. When she really gets stressed, he really gets stressed. But this comes ultimately to the day of the proposal. Steve is beside himself. He wants nothing more than for her to say yes, than for this to work out, than for tomorrow to be the first day of happily ever after. But she is a free agent. He cannot control her. And as much as he hopes, as much as he dreams, as much as he desires, he cannot be for certain that it is going to work out. Genesis 2, verse 24. man shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And I understand that's become a very complicated subject. The red pill versus the feminists. No one can figure it out. Everybody's worried about it because it's something that genuinely a lot of people want, and it seems very hard to do. I hope that my finance analogy has given you guys certainly not an answer, but a bit of a lens to maybe start to demystify what is inherently one of the most mysterious processes a human being can undergo. Thank you, and God bless.